Hey guys, welcome back to Etheria Restart. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at an updated tier list for the game. With the washout of the global launch, we found out a bunch of things that have impacted a few of the different lists. So Pridewinds updated their list. We're going to go through it, but before we do, I want to bring to your attention some changes that are effectively nerfs to some characters. Now, the changes happen mainly over in the Terramaton and also the Aurora bosses. We'll kick it off with both of them. They both had a change where now their max HP has been increased. So back in the last beta, the quote-unquote one-shot teams were very powerful when we looked to people basically just putting down all the debuffs with Dyna and then shooting them with like Didding and Victor and just one-shotting those bosses. So to counteract that, they've obviously increased the HP, so you can't sort of cheese it straight away at the launch. Now, if you want to do the big nuke combos, you're going to have to farm a bit longer, get some better gear, so on and so forth. The other thing is they both had their the amount they get their gauge pushed back by turn meter manipulation reduced. So it starts getting reduced in Hell and it gets reduced further in Inferno. I believe it was around 60% in Inferno, which is a big reduction, which actually happens to be a massive nerf. Not so much to Rosa, because Rosa is still amazing for the mechanics in Aurora, but the biggest one who got crippled by this is going to be Marvel. He just got an absolute big nerf by that. He'd already got his cooldown of his skill 3 increased, the amount it reduces decreased, and now he gets further nerfed in these bosses. So that's why you will see him dropping on a lot of these lists, is because against these two bosses specifically, he just doesn't work as well. And then we're also seeing that in the Doki fight, his cooldown reduction is just too much to deal with, and he's also falling off there as well. So big nerfs to Marvel just through the implementation of one, his nerf, but also the changes to the bosses over there. Now, the other thing that's happened in Threshold Aurora is they just did a hotfix, and it looks like poisons are no longer a viable strategy. So we're over here in Aurora, and if we come down here, we should see Shadow Sanya sitting right down there on the bottom, because that is no longer going to be a viable option to go ahead and play that poison strategy. So big rip to the Shadow Sanya. Even though she is a great unit and the poison strategy is awesome, too many bosses just say, nope, he can't work against me. So I struggle to invest into a Shadow Sanya for a new player. Later on, I definitely see for whales or people who've been playing a longer term, it's a good idea, but or a viable idea. But yeah, early on, when you know your main team sometimes just gets shut down by a passive that the boss has that says, no, you can't damage me, I think it kind of sucks. I feel like as an LD unit, she should have something to bypass that, but unfortunately, she doesn't at the moment. So those are the big changes that happen. Now, we're not going to look at generic PvE. I think you guys are getting a feel for how generic PvE works and new teams that you use there. As I mentioned, Aurora, the big drop is to Marvel over there. You can see that they have added Mia into these tier lists. They also added the other chick, what's her name? Mizuki. Mizuki's not really doing too much, as you can see. A tier 1 in Terramaton, nothing above that, so she's not crazy. We're not going to touch on her too much. But pretty much across here, with the Aurora, Heinrich always going to be amazing, because you need to strip those buffs, especially those immunities. So pretty much, you know, he's going to be the optimal one for stripping those if you opt for that. Rosa, just the multi-hitters are huge in this for dealing with the issues that you have inside this one. So getting the multi-hitters, not just on her attack, but when she does her follow-ups, is absolutely fantastic. Plus, she's on element, which is good. Beonton for the revives, the crit damage buff, the turn advance. She's just attack buff as well. She's just an all-round fantastic unit. Lily, because Lily, I speak about Lily too much, and she's just good everywhere in the game, essentially. So she is obviously going to fall in there. And then we have Linglo as the optimal sustain over here. And that's pretty much the top tier of these ones. Kind of makes sense. Not too much crazy to go in there. Viper, seeing some use over here for the strip effect from the skill 3. Dyna for those more high damage comps. And then we have our next tier of damage dealers being Messiah and Didding. Didding turning out to be an absolutely fantastic one at global launch. Obviously, Victor getting nerfed has brought this guy up, so he is getting used a lot in different areas at the moment. And then we have Messiah, who's just an absolute monster. Being neutral element, if you do have this guy, he's a pretty safe one to build up because he's going to be usable everywhere. So you can just slap him in and you know you're going to get decent work out of him. As you can see from his tier ratings, he is pretty strong across the board everywhere, especially in PvP. Now, I'm not going to go too much in depth into the rest of the tiers over here in Aurora. Doki, I did a whole Doki guide. It pretty much lines up with everything I was thinking over there. These top 2 tiers is pretty much what you want to build a team out of, using those 4 main roles that I go through in the video. If you want more in depth, you can check out that video. But essentially, yeah, these 2 tiers pretty much sum up what is happening over in the Doki fight. I don't think you really need to go too much below this. Unless you are missing out on all of these DPS, then you can come down here and look for a DPS in this one. Rin actually pretty solid in this one as well. But besides that, you should be able to make a team out of these units up here and do pretty well in general for Doki Doki. Teramaton, once again, doing some massive work over here. Poison's working incredibly well against Teramaton because he's not immune to them. Fancy that. If you're not immune to it, you do pretty well. Besides that, once again, Heinrich for the stripping, always going to be valuable. Anywhere where Kloss is not a negative affinity, she's going to be absolutely fantastic. Def break, speed, slow, damage mitigation from her unique buff, also damage amplification, turn manipulation. She's just an absolute monster everywhere that isn't Aurora pretty much. So that pretty much sums up that one. Once again, I'm not going to go too in depth into this. These are your sustains that are going to work well. A lot of teams using Valerian there to avoid getting the one shot because Valerian's passive, the way she stops a death is absolutely fantastic. So you can really cheese around with that with the Valerian. So she's getting a ton of usage over there. And then obviously we're not going to have Ling Lo up there because when they consider Inferno, Ling Lo is just getting tapped by Teramaton. Anything blue in Teramaton is 100% getting tapped, and you're just not going to do too much about it. But that's pretty much there. I don't want to go too in-depth into this one as well. But if you are looking at Teramaton, just note you want to deal a lot of damage and you also want to avoid getting killed by the Teramaton. And those are the 2 main things. Once again, stripping is going to be very important for that boss as well if you are trying to deal maximum damage by putting debuffs on and hitting into it as hard as possible. Now, the next one I want to look at quickly is going to be the Union Boss and Phantom Theater. So these 2 kind of fall into one. Now, obviously, you've got different elements in both of these, in both Union Boss and Phantom Theater, but whenever you're doing it, it's all single target damage. Some of them have different effects. For instance, I think it's the Dark Union Boss where you want to have at least 3 or 4, I can't remember how many debuffs on it at a time. So there are going to be different requirements. So this is just going to be general single target bossing tier list, essentially like that. And as you can see, once again, based on damage ratings, Chloros is going to be top there. Although not one you probably want to build as like your first 6-star unless you just love the dude, because he isn't really shining as bright in the other areas, and you could probably have a better DPS to carry you through the early game. And then invest into this guy later once you've got some good gear and you start trucking through those bosses. Kloss, once again, her universal debuffs are absolutely fantastic. The Freya with the advancing and denying of turn gauge, especially the advancing when you've got other buffers on your team, is going to be fantastic. Plus she has, the defense buff. She's got the attack buff. She does have a lot to her kit, which is really good for these drawn out fights. Lily, obviously, speed buff for the whole team, amplifying your main damage dealer. Pretty much gets it all done really over there. And then we have the 2 primary healers that we have over there, which is going to be Sanya and also Ling Lo. Not too much to emphasize on that. Hellkid working decent in a lot of areas. Once again, he's that one where I just feel like he's just a really solid unit. And I love him for PvP mainly, but he's working anywhere where you need to mitigate some damage because those shields are huge. Also anywhere where you do need a bit of immunity, because in the dogs, the Phantom Theater, you do get a lot of debuffs and turn manipulation and all that sort of stuff. So getting the immunity as well is going to be nice. Chiaki the Echo working great as a free-to-play option for that attack buffing option. Once again, her attack buff is just much more reliable to keep up than something like a Freya, but she does lack the defensive capabilities that the Freya does bring. Then we have Heinrich. Like I said, some areas applying debuffs is going to be really nice. So Heinrich putting debuffs on is going to be fantastic for countering a lot of those boss mechanics. There's one in the Phantom Theater, but also in the Union bosses where he is very effective for that. And then we've got our general DPS. Rahu, great DPS, but also great survivability, great team support as well. As I mentioned earlier, Messiah, absolute beast, Didding, absolute beast, and then Rosa working fantastic on single target as well. And then you start to filter down through the tiers. Then we take a look at PvP. So PvP at the moment, once again, early PvP is a bit funny because it is still like outspeed them, use Marvel, use Mio, completely deny them, then freeze them, then just completely bone them essentially. Once people start farming more immunity, we will see a shift in the meta. I know at the end of the last beta, we did get heavily into a bruiser meta, and you can see that sort of forming with Rahu. Rahu's a great bruiser type unit, so he's working well. Tiamat always worked well. Hellkid, absolutely amazing, because if you can outspeed with the Hellkid and then just put your immunity up, well, then this all goes away. So it's always going to be speed races in PvP. It's always going to be a thing. But in general, you know, this is kind of what we are looking at. Messiah, absolute monster. If you have like a Tsukiyomi, just boost a Messiah who's really well geared. He could just tap some teams in general with that attack buff. You know, you just build him super slow and with a truckload of damage, and then he just goes pop, and then everything's dead. So that is definitely going to be a thing you will see, and you will get cleaned up by a few Messiahs along the way. But that is a general look at it. I'm not going to dive too deep into PvP at the moment, but you know, I think we will see the bruiser meta start to shine in maybe another week or so. It will start to climb up, and then maybe we will shift away from that yet again. Anticipating Hoyan banner to come out, so hopefully she will shake things up in PvP, because she was more of a PvP unit the way she was built back in 2 betas ago, so we'll have to wait and see how she comes into the game. But that is a look at the updated tier list. Once again, the big changes happening are in the 2 bosses, the Aurora and Terramaton. So those are where the bulk of the changes happened, and then the rest of it is just kind of taking a look at the meta. Once again, Mio making big waves in the PvP at the moment. All that control when no one has immunity sets at the moment is absolutely monstrous. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for the updated tier list. Let me know any thoughts you guys have about the tier list. Once again, I don't look at these things as this is definitively the top tier. I just like looking at it, talking about the state of the game, and rambling for a little bit, because you guys know I can ramble. But anyway, that is going to do it for this one. As always, thanks for watching. Hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.